Oil is present in every aspect of our life. Petroleum may be found in everything from our automobile fuel to our shampoo bottles, roadways, and more. Petroleum products are being utilized as transportation fuel, as well as for heating and generating power. Oil may also be present in plastics, chemicals, and a variety of other synthetic materials. While the United States was the first to transform oil production into a vast business thanks to the efforts of John D. Rockefeller, it is not the only country having large reserves of the commodity. Drilling for oil began at Titusville, Pennsylvania, in 1859. However, much of the oil known to reside in American soil has been removed throughout time. Today, the nations with the biggest known oil reserves are mostly, but not entirely, in the Middle East. Here is a list of the countries with the most oil reserves. 10. United States, 47 billion barrels. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, in 2019, 45% of the petroleum consumed in the U.S. was used as gasoline in automobiles, 20% as heating and diesel fuel, and 8% as jet fuel. The United States remained the world's greatest producer of oil and gas, generating more over 4 billion barrels of crude oil in 2021. This was a decrease from the peak in 2019, although it is still greater than at any time before to that year. Texas produces by far the most oil in the state, with North Dakota and New Mexico generating less than half of what Texas produces, and the remaining 32 U.S. states producing the remainder. 9. Libya, 48 billion barrels. Libya is claimed to hold Africa's greatest oil reserves. Unfortunately, the country's civil war has resurfaced, and as a result, oil production and export have ceased. In order to put pressure on the government, warlord Khalifa Haftar shut down oil facilities in the country's east and center in January 2020. In 2021, Libya's oil output was 1.27 million barrels per day, rising more than 840,000 barrels per day from the previous year. In 2016, the African country reported its lowest oil output at roughly 412,000 barrels of oil per day. The majority of Libya's crude oil is supplied to European nations. In 2020, imports from Europe accounted for around 63% of Libya's crude oil and condensate exports. Libya's main export destinations were Italy, Germany, and Spain. In 2020, Asia, namely China, is expected to receive 25% of Libya's oil exports. Figure 3. 8. Russia, 80 billion barrels. Russian oil contributes for around 11% of total global oil production. The majority of the country's petroleum is found in areas in western Siberia and is extracted by state-owned businesses such as Lukoil and Rosneft. The oil sector was handled by private firms when the Soviet Union disintegrated, but that has since changed, and the largest oil-producing enterprises are all owned and operated by the state-owned monopoly. Russia produced roughly 10.9 million barrels of oil per day in 2021, up from 10.7 million barrels the previous year. Crude imports from Russia reached 0.2 million barrels per day in 2021, the highest level in several years, but still accounted for a modest fraction of overall imports and total crude oil processed by U.S. refineries, 1%. In 2021, U.S. refineries processed 15.1 million barrels of crude oil per day. 7. United Arab Emirates, 97 billion barrels. The UAE is slightly smaller than the state of Maine, yet it is nevertheless a significant role in the global oil sector. The country is made up of 7 sovereign city-states on the Arabian Gulf. Prior to the discovery of oil in the nation in the 1950s, the country's economy was based on fishing and the sale of pearls. The UAE is expected to have 97 billion barrels of oil reserves, allowing it to produce at high quantities for decades. ADNOC has been producing oil from its onshore and offshore assets in collaboration with renowned multinational oil firms like as ExxonMobil, BP, Total, and JPEX for decades. The UAE has proved reserves amounting to 299.0 times its yearly usage. This suggests that if net exports were not there would be around 299 years of oil remaining at current consumption levels and excluding unproven reserves. 6. Kuwait, 101 billion barrels. Located on the Persian Gulf between Iraq and Saudi Arabia, has oil reserves that, combined with gas, provide for almost 92% of its export earnings. Oil drilling began in the nation in 1938, and commercial exports began in 1946. Natural gas reserves total 1.5 trillion cubic meters, accounting for 1.1% of global reserves. Kuwait has 3.4 million foreign residents, including 1,055 million Kuwaitis. Kuwait claims another strike in its quest for additional oil, which would strengthen its position in the global oil market. Kuwait's oil minister, Ali Al-Jarrah Al-Sabah, announced Monday the discovery of a major oil field in the country's north. Sabah, on the other hand, refused to give any specifics about the discovery, but stated that will have great positive impact on the country's oil strategy. 5. Iraq, 145 billion barrels. Iraq has around 145 billion barrels of oil, making it the world's fifth largest oil state, and crude is critical to Iraq's economy, with oil sales accounting for almost 90% of the country's income. Iraq has a lot of oil. Hundreds of millions of barrels of oil are stored in the country's numerous oil fields. Until the United States attacked Iraq in 2003, the country's oil industry was overseen by the state and restricted to Westerners. This altered after the war. The nation's petroleum economy is now largely handled by private enterprises, with foreign firms dominating. While the U.S. military has legally completed its occupation of Iraq, ExxonMobil, BP, and Shell remain among the world's major oil companies. 4. Iran, 155 billion barrels. Iran has found itself in a sticky, or rather greasy situation. The country possesses a lot of oil and has lately discovered more. Iran claimed discovering 53 billion barrels of crude oil in the western region of Khuzestan in 2019. However, they are having difficulty selling it. U.S. sanctions, placed on the nation in 2018 after it was discovered to be violating a pact involving nuclear production in Iran, are barring its sale. UANI has now received paperwork listing the importers of over 80 separate shipments of Iranian oil to China dating back to December 2019, totaling about 77 million barrels out of 571 million barrels of Iranian oil supplied to China over the same time. 3. Canada, 167 billion barrels. It may surprise you to learn that Canada is ranked third on this list. Although Canada is best known for its nice people, moose, and cold winters, the western region of Alberta possesses large oil reserves. This petroleum is found in the country's contentious oil sands. Because the extraction procedure from oil sands is energy intensive, National Geographic brands Canada's oil business as the world's most damaging. Large swaths of the boreal forest have been burned to make room for bitumen mining from enormous, open pits visible from space. Canada has an enormous resource base, a stable political climate, and competent people, making it the ideal site to properly use our natural resources. 2. Saudi Arabia, 267 billion barrels. Saudi Arabia, located in the Middle East, is linked with oil production. However, the Saudis did not initiate the obsession. Standard Oil of the United States was the first to drill for petroleum in Saudi Arabia in 1933. Saudi Aramco, the kingdom's mostly state-owned oil-producing corporation, is now the world's most lucrative company and the world's largest oil producer. Saudi Arabia allegedly has the world's second biggest proven oil reserves, estimated in 2017 to be 268 billion barrels, including 2.5 gigatons in the Saudi-Kuwaiti neutral zone. At present rates of production, this would equate to more than 50 years. Saudi Arabia has proven reserves of 221.2 times its yearly usage. This suggests that if net exports were not there would be approximately 221 years of oil remaining at current consumption levels and excluding unproven reserves. Number 1. Venezuela, 303 billion barrels. Venezuela is a conflict-ridden and impoverished country. Ironically, it also has the world's greatest oil reserves, accounting for around 18% of total worldwide reserves. Petroleum, unsurprisingly, accounts for over 90% of this country's exports. However, this South American country's yearly oil output is being held back by aging oil extraction infrastructure. With an average of 418,000 barrels per day in 2021, Asia was the primary destination for Venezuelan crude oil exports. This accounted for more than 90% of the South American country's oil exports that year. Meanwhile, shipments to Latin America were fewer than 30,000 barrels per day. Oil is a limited resource that can only be used once. However, predicting when the world's oil reserves will run out is difficult. According to some forecasts, an oil catastrophe might occur within the next 100 years. However, there might be more in the earth than we know about. Will we make advantage of it? Climate change is prompting us to explore for other fuels. Because of this reality, scientists believe that we will have to leave 65% to 80% of our present known oil reserves untapped. Only by doing so can we avoid exceeding the current global target of 2 degrees Celsius of warming. However, oil consumption continues to rise, so whether or not we will achieve this target remains to be seen. Venezuela has the world's biggest known oil reserves, but old infrastructure and internal unrest prohibit it from producing as much as it might.